Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a weekly update on the most recent developments of the Russian aggression against Ukraine that took place between September 18th and 24th. The daily number of ceasefire violations committed by Russia-backed militants ranged between 14 and 27. The total number of ceasefire violations committed by Russia-backed militants over the week amounts to 139. Including 16 episodes of fire with the use of heavy weapons. Now let's have a look at the overall situation along the front line. Last week, the intensity of hostile fire was the lowest in the Luhansk sector. Enemy ceasefire violations were predominantly registered in the vicinity of Krymske and Novotoshkivske. The tensest situation was registered on September 19th. When Russia-backed militants opened fire with heavy arms multiple times at positions of Ukrainian armed forces near Krymske, Novotoshkivske, and Novozvanivka. Last week, the daily number of ceasefire violations by the enemy ranged between 0 and 9 episodes. Over the previous week, the intensity of enemy fire in Donetsk sector was the highest among all sectors. Invaders engaged positions of Ukrainian armed forces near Gorlivka, Avdiivka, and Donetsk airport with grenade launchers on a daily basis. On September 19th, Russian proxies opened complex fire with mortars, infantry fighting vehicles, and small arms against Pisky. Ukrainian defenders were forced to open return fire. Last week, the daily number of ceasefire violations by the enemy ranged between 6 and 17 episodes per day. Mariupol sector. Last week, the intensity of hostilities in the sector significantly decreased compared to previous weeks. As a rule, invaders committed up to 5 ceasefire violations with small arms per day. Over the week, southern defense lines remained the focal point of the enemy combat activity. However, invaders occasionally initiated low-intensity mortar fire against Krasnohorivka. On September 20th, Russia-trained militants opened mortar fire at Pavlopil and Shirokine. The daily number of ceasefire violations in the sector by the enemy ranged between 4 and 7. Over the week, Ukrainian troops registered 13 episodes of enemy drones performing aerial reconnaissance. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, enemy UAVs were predominantly used in the Donetsk sector. The Ukrainian military intelligence reports further military assistance coming from Moscow to its proxies. This time, Russia sent a train with 22 railway tank cars loaded with 1,320 tons of fuel and 5 railway cars with unidentified military cargo for the militants in eastern Ukraine. In addition, the militants received 35 main battle tanks and 3 infantry fighting vehicles. Per Ukrainian military intelligence, last week Russian proxies took part in the military exercises on the occupied territories. They were conducted simultaneously with the second part of the full-scale military drills Zapad 2017. For instance, units of the so-called 3rd Brigade and 9th Regiment of Russian occupational forces participated in the company-level tactical exercises. Also, battalions of the so-called 2nd, 4th Brigades and 6th Regiment took part in the battalion-level tactical exercises. Per Ukrainian military intelligence, specialists of 924th State Center for Unmanned Aviation of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Lipetsk, arrived in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. They will investigate recent breakdowns of Russian drones. It is likely that these regulars will also be testing new models of Russian drones over the front line against Ukrainian service members. Per intelligence reports, the total number of casualties amongst Russian proxies over the last week is 11 killed and 19 wounded. Additionally, invaders lost 1 UAV. According to the media and propaganda outlets of the Russian-backed militants, on September 23rd, the assassination attempt against Alexander Timofeyev, also known as Tashkent, was carried out. At 8:30 in the morning, his Lexus was blown up in the Donetsk. Timofeyev holds the position of the so-called Minister of Revenues and Taxes in the occupational administration, being the supervisor of the economic affairs in the quasi-state. As a result, he is among the 5 most influential people in the so-called DPR leadership. In 2014, Timofeyev joined the command of the DPR illegal armed group and took part in the hostilities against Ukrainian armed forces, including the Battle of Donetsk Airport. Over the past few years, Timofeyev became rich, but he also found enemies among other separatists, Russian curators, and impoverished civilians. We consider the assassination attempt to be a logical outcome of his criminal activities. Ukraine, however, insists that this has no relation to this incident. Russian Minister of Defense reported that Lieutenant General Valery Asapov had been killed in action in Syria. Asapov previously took part in hostilities in eastern Ukraine. For example, in 2015 and 2016, he was the commander of the so-called First Army Corps of Russian occupational forces in Donbass. His undercover ID was issued on the name of Valery Primakov. As a commander, he was responsible for numerous war crimes that Russia-backed militants committed against Ukrainian service members and civilians. Russian Federation had tested cruel methods and means of warfare in Ukraine that brought it to Syria. Despite Moscow's denial, Russian regulars and mercenaries sustained heavy losses in both conflicts. Thus, Lieutenant General Valery Asapov became one of them. Last week, 1 Ukrainian service member was killed in action, and 8 service members were wounded in action. Our hearts go out to the family and friends of the fallen Ukrainian hero. Last week, 2 private homes were damaged by enemy hostile fire. One of them is located in Mayorsk, Donetsk sector, and the other is located in Granitne, Mariupol sector. Last week, 3 segments of electric power lines in Avdiivka and in Yasinovato district, Donetsk sector, were torn by enemy shells. All of them were repaired by Ukrainian emergency services in a timely manner. Last week, Ukrainian authorities arranged for access and safe passage through a government checkpoint of 27 trucks carrying humanitarian aid for civilians living in the temporarily occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. Nearly 420 tons of food, hygiene products, and construction materials were provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross, as well as by the Orthodox religious organizations. That'll be all. Thank you very much for your attention.